Welcome to Outside Voices with me, Mark Bidwell, where I talk to remarkable and compelling leaders from the worlds of business, arts, sports, exploration, and academia. In these conversations, I explore topics of fundamental importance to many of us today, both in work and in life, topics ranging from leadership and performance to creativity and growth. Outside Voices has a very clear purpose: to bring fresh and diverse perspectives that help listeners navigate the world we live in. What follows is the first of two episodes featuring Vas Narasimhan, who's CEO of Novartis, which is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, with a market cap at the moment of about $250 billion. Now, Vas is a doctor by background, and he's not your typical CEO. Prior to taking on this role, he spent over a decade in the Novartis R&D function and is a little over a year into executing an ambitious strategy to reimagine medicine. And in this episode, we cover lots of ground, including what does he mean by this phrase, reimagining medicine, and what impact this has on how the company invests almost $10 billion a year on R&D. And he talks about the mindset of a drug hunter and the role played by passion and by serendipity in innovation. And he talks with a real glint in his eye about market access. Although Novartis is the largest producer of medicines in the world, supplying approximately 90 billion doses of medicine a year, these reach less than 1 billion patients. And at the other end, there are at least 2 billion people on the planet who have absolutely no access whatsoever to any medical care. And Vas wants to change this, and he wants to do it quickly too. And so the strategies that he describes are very topical, as they are at the heart of Clayton Christensen's new book, The Prosperity Paradox, which I'm happy to be featuring later on in this series. And what Novartis is doing in terms of catalytic investments that create a virtuous circle, building capacity and maturity in local healthcare systems is compelling and gives cause for optimism. But it's by no means easy, and it does require a very different mindset. So here is Vas. So Vas, very nice to meet you. Let's start with what led you to choose this career path?
I started out in the world of public health. I had studied medicine. I worked extensively at that time in Africa, in Latin America, with some great public health luminaries, people like Paul Farmer, Jim Kim, amongst others. And I got very passionate about how to impact health on a large scale. That included time in Botswana. I had the opportunity to work on the first antiretroviral treatment program in 2001. I worked on malaria control, TB, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. All of it showed me the power of technology to impact health on a large scale. Because in the end, these were all ultimately about finding new medicines, new innovations, and trying to get them to large numbers of people. So then there was a moment in time where the question was, do I go into clinical medicine or do I try to take the path of leadership? And I decided at that moment, probably against the advice of many wise people, to go down the path of leadership. So I took a detour out of public health into the business world, and then the rest sort of took hold from there, and I've ended up now being CEO of a great company.
And so that was when did you make that decision?
It was 2003, 2004.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then for a lot of your time, Novartis, you've been running the R&D activities, right? Where I think the company spends 10 billion a year?
9 to 10 billion.
Which is a big proportion as a percentage of sales, bigger than some of your peers, I guess, as a percentage of sales.
Yeah, and the company's legacy is very committed, an R&D-based company, very committed deeply to innovation. We've generally always invested more than 20% of our innovative medicines sales in R&D. I've had the opportunity to work in R&D across the enterprise. So in vaccines is where a lot of my background is, in vaccines R&D, but then also in Sandoz and our biosimilars R&D, and then also running product development for all of Novartis Pharmaceuticals. So all of them gave me different perspectives, certainly on innovation.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, that kind of number, it's hugely complex, the targets you're going after, hundreds of thousands, I'd imagine, of projects. How do you... Warren Buffett says, the number one job of a CEO is to allocate capital effectively. So how do you and your team gives you confidence that you're allocating that kind of money to the right things?
R&D in our industry, I think it's underappreciated how hard it is to do the work that we do. I mean, I always tell our teams it's a miracle we find any medicines at all. I always try to think about it. We try to unpack 4 billion years of evolution and try to find a single molecule that's going to impact these complex systems that developed over these billions of years. The human body is estimated to be 36 trillion cells. One cell has 100 trillion molecules. So this is really complex. So I won't sit here and tell you we've got some magic algorithm to figure this out. But what we try to do is take a risk-based approach where we have, of course, through all the various stage gates, we look at whether it's first coming into man or even an earlier stage in animal studies all the way through late stage development. What I think we've learned is we have to try to quantitate the uncertainty of every one of these projects, look at those numbers with open eyes, ask ourselves, are we actually going to change the practice of medicine as in the standard of care, and then make the tough decisions? I would say over the last decade, we've increasingly made the bar higher, probably stopped more projects in that effort to try to improve the returns we have in R&D. And that is a challenge in our industry to keep showing we can find those next wave of medicines and do it at a more efficient way. The other element of allocating capital in R&D in my mind is not just selecting the right projects, but also making the operations far more efficient. I mean, one of the things we try to do at Novartis is invest heavily in technology, including artificial intelligence, in the actual operations of clinical trials to see, can we reduce the cost of every one of these medicines that we're trying to develop? And hopefully by doing both of those things, we can get to a better equation.
Over at Syngenta, there were people who'd be working on molecules that would never make it to market. And they might never have worked on something that actually found itself in the market. And I guess it's the same here. You've got 24,000 people in R&D?
Something like that. And if you think about it, a fraction of the molecules our scientists work on get into a human being. Of the ones that get into a human being, only 5 to 10 will ever get all the way to the end of the development process. So if you take all of that together, yes, the odds are if you're a research scientist, you're not going to work on a medicine that's going to actually get to a human being. So motivating in that environment is not easy.
How do you do that? How do you maintain that level of curiosity? And we'll get to the change piece in a minute, but what does that look like?
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me is the passion in general in our company, but probably in other companies in our industry, just to impact human health is so strong that most scientists in our company, I think they're humble in the face of those odds, but still, very ambitious in believing they can come up with something bold. And I think one of the key things is they have to believe we're a company that will be consistently investing if they do find one of those breakthroughs. I mean, I think one thing I think we're proud about is we're willing to take bold bets, whether it's cell therapies or gene therapies or transforming difficult conditions in cardiovascular disease or oncology. We're willing to take the bold bets. And because they know if they find something, we will make the bold bet, I think that gives them hope. But I think it is hard to fail 100 times to get maybe the one chance to have a huge impact.
Yeah. Because I think you talked about the discipline with which you apply the criteria. That's part of the success. I mean, because it's always been talked about in the industry as a portfolio, a strong portfolio. You've now got, I think, 10 blockbusters coming out in the next 2 years, I think.
Yeah, hopefully 10. And then we have 26 potential blockbusters in the late stage portfolio. So quite vast.
Yeah. And many of those are based on decisions made a decade ago, I guess.
Yeah. From a science standpoint, a decade ago. From a development standpoint, about 3 to 5 years ago.
Yeah. What are some of the common misperceptions about innovation in the industry? I mean, lots of people talk about the eureka moments. I'm just curious as to what do you find yourself having to explain to people about, to address these misperceptions?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. I come back again to how hard it is. I mean, I always come back. One of my favorite stats is that if you look at the FDA in the United States, they've only approved 1,500 new molecular entities in the entire history of the FDA over the last 100 years. And if you probably account for the fact that many of those are in the same class of drugs, not really a breakthrough, my guess is there's probably fewer than 1,000 we've ever found, and many of those probably weren't that efficacious. So you do all of those cuts, still on my list of things one day to do that. You have only a handful of significant medicines we found. So it's really hard. Second is the importance of serendipity. I mean, in the end, despite lots of smart people and lots of our efforts to understand human biology, there is a fair amount of serendipity that we happen upon a finding. Mm-hmm. And it's, in my mind, incredibly important that you're open to serendipity when you see it and not just say, it doesn't fit into my model, therefore I'm going to reject the finding. I think the third is the importance of people. I mean, in the end, it's such a complex task to find a new medicine. I often find myself looking into the eyes of our researchers or our development people saying these are individuals who have a track record of sort of having the drug hunter's mindset. They can smell a drug. And sort of when you see those individuals tell me, look, I think there's something here, you have to listen. Yes. You have to follow those instincts because it is such a complex task that you have to rely on great people who have great instincts. Otherwise, you're going to miss something big. And I think we've been able to collect people. One of the things that I'm very proud of is we have very long tenures in our R&D organization. I mean, people stay at Novartis. They accumulate lots of experience. And then you have to trust those people, unleash their energy, and go with their instincts.
Yeah. And we come back to the challenge of an organizational change in that environment in the future. Reimagining medicine, which is how you talk about the new strategy, I guess, or the evolution strategy. I mean, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, when we try to switch more now than ever into what I like to think of as a focused medicines company powered by data science and by these new advanced therapies and breakthrough innovation. Reimagining medicine in my mind is to keep reimagining the standard of care for all of these conditions. It comes back to, can we achieve a new standard for treatment in many of the most burdensome diseases on the planet? It also means reimagining what is a medicine, and that's becoming an increasingly big part of the story. If you think about it, for the first 50, 100 years of this industry, we all thought it was primarily chemicals, small molecules. Then we moved on and we thought large molecules, antibodies. And actually, interestingly, when first antibodies came out, most people thought those companies were crazy. Now they're the largest medicines in the world, those monoclonal antibodies, and this is really over a 25-year period. Now we enter a world where we can take human cells and reprogram them, put them back into the body, and dramatically impact disease, sometimes cure it. We can insert genes into children and hopefully cure some pretty terrible condition.
The leukemia.
So one is leukemia. Our cell therapy would be in leukemia. Our gene therapy would be in a condition called SMA, but likely many others using a similar technology. I mean, we're entering a world where people are certainly exploring things like xenotransplantation. Can we grow human organs in animals or in vitro and then solve the transplantation problem? So you have all these new ways we're thinking about what is a therapeutic, even a digital therapeutic. We launched with our collaborator Pear, the first FDA-approved digital therapeutic, which is actually just an app. And the app is the drug, so to speak. So I think reimagining medicine also now is increasingly reimagining how do we impact disease.
Yeah. Okay. So can we now move to market access? Because I know that's a topic that you're very passionate about. In the past, you've worked in some medical hotspots, if you can say that. And I'm just really interested. I mean, 2 billion people without access to medicines, I think. And I think the company supplies products are used by about 1 billion people, I think, for Novartis. So, I mean, how do you, these are the kind of, we talked about it earlier on, these are the non-consumers, to use the Clayton Christensen term. I mean, how are you thinking about market access? And how's that evolved over time, the way to think about this?
Yeah, it's really been an evolution, and I think that's the important part of the story. For much of Novartis' history, a lot of this was done through drug donations, also donations of other things. I mean, Novartis was a pioneer, SIBA was a pioneer in DDT, which was one of the technologies that enables many parts of the world to live malaria-free. But it was really about drug donation. One of our biggest donation programs started in the 1980s for leprosy medications. So we started out thinking about donations. Then in about 2000, with our introduction of the first new combination for malaria, a drug called Coartem, which now is, I think, one of the most, if not probably the most widely used malaria medicine in the world. We moved to a model of where we sell at cost and invest in the infrastructure to actually get the medicines to the people who most need them. So this was a switch for us. And over the last 15, 20 years, we've now almost reached 1 billion patients reached with Coartem. Then our evolution went to another step, and we said that's not enough. How do we actually build local communities' capacity to take on medicine? So we started a project called Novartis Social Business. This involved reaching about 40 million people through village health workers, where really it's a bottom-up trying to build a capacity for people to get diagnosed and then use very basic medicines, hypertension, diabetes. That took about a decade, but eventually got to break even as a sort of social business. Along the way, we also launched a program called Novartis Access to get medicines to patients around the world who needed non-communicable disease medicines. But again, these were older medicines. So if you think about it, we go from donations to starting to invest, then to really investing. But the theme throughout all that time is the new innovations were not coming. Yeah. And the big step we took last year was to say that's not enough. Our mandate now as a company has to be, how do we find ways to get our newest innovations to that bottom of the pyramid much, much faster? We set a goal for within a year. That's, I think, of course, ambitious. But we now ask every launch team to come forward and tell us, how are we going to approach this problem? Right now, we have over 100 brands now launched with our emerging market brands program, which gets these innovations to patients. That's a huge focus now, is how can we say, like a new medicine like our Entresto medicine for heart failure, we actually did pretty well. We got it into sub-Saharan Africa within 2 years of launch. For each new innovation, how are we going to get there? And a big part of that story is going to be, how do we support healthcare systems to be built up to tackle some of these non-communicable diseases? So that was what I see as the next wave in access for us.
You need to be very patient to do this kind of work, of course. And I suppose you need a different skill set as well, because it's not just about coming up with a new product. I mean, what's that look like from a resource allocation perspective in the company?
Yeah, I mean, we commit a lot of resources, I think, relatively speaking. On the R&D side, hundreds of millions of dollars for tropical medicine and these things. But from an access standpoint, we also are investing a lot in healthcare infrastructure locally. I think what we can do realistically is do catalytic investments. So if you think of an example, in Kenya, we made early investments into transplantation in Kenya to enable Kenya to build up its capacity to do kidney transplants as model projects. Eventually, the government took that on and scaled it nationally. Similar effort we're doing now in Ghana in sickle cell disease. Again, we make seed investments to try to help the government do screening for sickle cell disease, hoping that that'll become a national program. We're doing that in hypertension, heart failure. The challenge for us is we simply don't have the resources to take on the whole mass of the problem. I think our focus will continue to be these kind of catalytic model projects, and then we have to advocate with the governments. Can they really take this on and scale it?
Yeah. Well, and you've also got the generics business as well, which enables you to at least keep prices competitive for some of these marketplaces.
Yeah, and that will remain. When you think about Novartis Access or many of our other projects, I mean, it's our generics portfolio that we really enable access to. What I'm very interested in is how do we get the new innovations more rapidly in. So, and I think the key for us has been the emerging market brand program, where we can basically enable some of these brands to be launched at very locally relevant prices in a locally relevant way to try to get uptake more quickly. Because if you think about it, if you get new innovations into these countries and get physicians to understand the latest innovation, if you get clinical trials, so then there becomes a culture of inquiry, you start to build up students, you start to build up capacity. What I've observed, I was recently in Gabon, and it was remarkable to see how research investment and bringing new innovations in creates a virtuous cycle where actually the healthcare system starts to mature much more quickly. And then you can reach many more patients with even basic care. And I think that's a big opportunity for us.
Well, and potentially you can leap with some of these new technologies. I think you talked about, is it Zipline?
Yeah.
Zipwire?
Yeah, Zipline, yeah.
You can leapfrog some of these infrastructure challenges as well with this sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, Zipline's a great example where, we blood donation, the distribution of blood is a huge challenge. I think Rwanda pioneered it, where, you basically use drones to provide the supply of blood. Zipline now expanded to Tanzania. Now they'll move to Ghana. They'll also now distribute medicines. And actually, we're looking to potentially also have some of our Novartis medicines, distributed through Zipline. That's one example. Others is just simple technology to do supply chain management so that any depot in a healthcare system can quickly flag that they're out of a medicine. Simple thing. Mm-hmm. But before, if that's unknown and not rapidly sent through an online system, so that program was called SMS for Life. We developed it and now deployed it to just allow supply chain management within these systems. I think technology has a big role to play. And I think actually what I expect in the next decade is the startup community in Africa and Asia is going to take on many of these problems which didn't have a lot of traction for many years and actually really tackle them at scale. So that's one thing we're investing in, others are investing in. We invest through Startup Health as well as our own individual investments to try to invest in entrepreneurs who are taking these things on. Now,
I mean, the other end of the spectrum, I think in your recent results, you talked about a $5 billion product, Zolgensma. $5 million product. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry. I'm curious, there's no judgment here, but how do you reconcile these two positions and the price spectrum, if you like?
The first thing I'd say is, people always ask me, are you about rare diseases or about highly prevalent diseases? And I just say we're about improving the human condition. And it's not about how many people have the disease. It's can we transform the care of this disease? So yes, we will be probably one of the largest cardiovascular drug makers in the world, making hundreds of millions of doses of malaria medicines for, hundreds of millions of people, producing 60 billion doses of generic drugs. And also, yes, we will also do gene therapies to cure children of deadly diseases. I think we can be both. I think we need to be both if we really want to deliver on our strategy to reimagine medicine. I think from a price standpoint, I think about it as value. And in the end, the value that we've been able to demonstrate with gene therapies is quite remarkable as a one-time therapy. Now, it does require a paradigm shift in how we think about medicine. We come back to reimagining medicine. We're used to medicines that people take in chronic diseases for decades, pill after pill, month after month, paying for all of that. And now suddenly we show up with technology where it's a single infusion to address the disease. And that change has a whole paradigm shift in how we need to get, of course, paid, but then also how the system needs to reimburse it. I actually see it more as a fiscal challenge. I mean, what we need is new models that allow payments over time. But if you look at the cost effectiveness of cures or cost effectiveness of radically improving patient outcomes, it's actually quite cost effective. If you take the example of our cell therapy, Kymriah, the cost effectiveness analysis suggested it was cost effective, particularly because children are cured of their cancer in many instances, at $800,000 to $900,000. We priced it at 50% of that. So 50% of the quote unquote cost effective price to society. The tricky thing here is explaining this. The dialogue. The rationales are all clear to health policymakers, and we can explain. I think for the public to explain this is one of the challenges I have to tackle.
Yeah, and of course, from a personal point of view, we've had a fantastic experience with Novartis products, and it's genuinely transformative for our life, actually. And I think until you've actually sat in that seat or experienced that, it's very difficult to fully understand what you're saying, because people jump to the sticker shock without fully understanding the context of it. Yeah.
It's interesting. In the case of SMA, we get letters from patients who have had their children's lives transformed by this single infusion. Many of them want to join Novartis. Many of them join the company actually because they want to be part of that journey, because they actually see the miracle of being told their child might surely die, having a single infusion of a medicine, and suddenly their child is developing normally.
Yeah.
That is truly miraculous.
Yes, extraordinary. This podcast is produced by Outside Lens, a business that brings you fresh and diverse perspectives that help you navigate the world we live in. For more information, go to www.outsidelens.com, where you can find details on this and many more podcasts that I've done with remarkable leaders over the years. If you found this episode particularly valuable, please share it on social media. I hope you enjoy my work, and feel free to let me know what you think, either contacting me on LinkedIn or emailing me at mark@outsidelens.com.